Perfect Pitch. I'm your host, Nicole Rodriguez, also the CEO and founder of NRPR Group. And on Perfect Pitch, for those of you who have never watched or this is your first time watching or listening, this is a show where we bring on some of the best top media to discuss best practices, and we give them the opportunities to share their stories about how they got into the media, how they landed in their respective roles, and what makes a great story for them. Today, I am really excited to welcome I would say I've kind of fangirled over a lot of her writing for a very long time. We met years ago at an industry mixer, and I've just been following her writing ever since. We have gotten a chance to work together on a really cool story with a past client. We'll go into that. But I want to welcome to the stage Susan Karlin, who is a regular contributor to places like Fast Company and other really, really cool outlets. But I'll have her name drop all of them, but a couple of them, New York Times, NPR, Scientific American, but all these places where her love for space, science, autonomous vehicles, and the future of transportation. Also, I think I read a story recently or I think it was around this time last year, was about the future of face masks. And I was totally immersed by it. So anyway, with that being said, Susan, I am so happy to have you here. I'm excited to share your brain with everyone. And I will welcome you to the stage now to tell us a little bit about yourself, who you write for, how long have you been doing it, and tell us how it all happened.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for that amazing introduction. And we should let the audience know that I have not paid you to say that, but I think in the future, I'm going to just have you come along to any other kind of interview that I do. Yeah. So thank you. I write primarily for Fast Company, and most recently have been writing about space science, the future of transportation, autonomous vehicles. Before that, I was writing about the nexus of science, technology, and arts. And I've also written for Scientific American, NPR, BBC Radio, New York Times, some of the, Discover. I'm trying to think. I'm going to have a piece in Air and Space magazine this summer. IEEE Spectrum, which is an engineering publication. But I've also written for Entertainment Weekly and TV Guide and Variety and Hollywood Reporter. So it's kind of run the gamut between entertainment and hard science, which is a very weird mix.
I love it. And how did that come to be? Is it just that you were so fascinated by science that was just something that you decided that you were going to gravitate towards and immerse yourself in? Or did it happen by accident?
No, actually, I've always been sciences and arts. Those are my two areas. And I was equally strong in both. And I couldn't decide. When I was in college, I was pre-med, but I was also acting in school shows. And I was writing for the school newspaper and doing photography and camping out in the dark room, because in those days you used film. And I was like, one summer I did an internship at a hospital, and then in the morning, and then I go in the afternoon and do an internship at a theater. So I was very split. I couldn't decide which to do. And when I found journalism, I found it to be a real hybrid of the two worlds, because it was academic and it was creative. And I had so many interests, and it enabled me to indulge my interests, and I could flip from subject to subject. And it's kind of like mental traveling. You get to visit all of these different worlds and be part of that world for a little while, and then leave and go somewhere else. And so that's what I realized, that it suited my personality really well.
I love it. I love that. And I've never heard anyone sort of describe that sort of, fluttering from one world to another. I know that with media, you guys get a chance to see so many things before your average human, right?
Right.
People want to share things with you before it's released. Sometimes asking your opinion about things before things are even unveiled and released. So that must be such a great opportunity to just, I think, just information gather too, right? And it's like, okay, I'm here on planet, AI, and now I'm going to go over here. And I think for those people who are creative and academic, I look, journalism was almost my major, right? I wanted to get into journalism until I had a journalism teacher tell me I should look into PR. And I was like, is that because you think I'm not going to make a good journalist? But he was like, no, I think that, this side of the world, I mean, we work so closely together.
Well, there are a lot of parallels. It's shared
Mhm.
skill sets, and even when I'm working with a publicist, I don't think of it as I have to deal with a publicist, which I've heard reporters say. I look at it as a partnership because, and especially if a publicist is really good at their job, they're going to know their client inside and out. And so I'll be able to almost pre-interview the publicist, and let's say they pitch a story and it seems interesting, and I'll call them up and I'm like, okay, let me get a few more details that I need so that I can then pitch it to my editor. And so then I'll talk to the publicist. And if the publicist really knows their stuff, then she doesn't have to bother the CEO. She doesn't have to, she could just tell me everything or get the answers back quickly. And then I can put together my own pitch for my editor and go from there. Um, it's more difficult if I call the publicist back and they're like, oh, let me put you on the phone with. And it's like, no, let me not do an interview with your client. Let me find out first if it's something that my editor wants, because then you're sort of putting me in a position of having to, start working on the story before I even have an answer yet.
No, I
So
think that's such a great point. And again, for the audience, for those of you who are listening who are PR pros, that is why, I tell people that in order to be a really good publicist or public relations professional, you have to know your client's messaging sometimes better than your client, right? I feel like sometimes, especially CEOs who have an engineering background, they decide that they want to go from engineer to entrepreneur. And now they have this great idea and they get lost in their own sauce sometimes. And being able to take them out of it, uncover and say, okay, so what you're trying to say you do is X in human, right? Translating geek to human. And if they say, oh, yeah, that's it, well, then it's our job as the translator go to the media person and say, look, I have this great idea, right? I see that you're covering biotech, and I see that this has been something that you've been sort of immersing yourself in. I have a client that can do X. If I send that email to you, I always tell my team, be ready to accept a phone call. If they call you, you have to be ready. This is why I tell them, study the messaging. This is why before we even start pitching, we develop messaging with our clients. And so I'm so happy to hear that you say that, because we should be able to answer some of those questions. And if there's something really intricate that it's like, ooh, you know what, that's a detail that I don't want to overstep my knowledge on. That's something that maybe the CTO will know better than I do, but I do know that they fit into this, so that you are at least getting enough to feel like you can make a qualified decision on whether or not you want to take the next step, right?
yeah, exactly. And also, especially with technical things, I did a story recently where the pitch was a really good pitch, but it wasn't quite accurate. And so it wasn't until I got into the meat of the technical elements, and it was a difficult story. And I was like, oh, because the publicist told me X, but it's actually Y. And so I had to rejigger the story a little bit, and it I was able to figure out a solution to it, but it was wrong enough that it caused me a little bit of concern. And but I was able to sort it out and figure out a way through it. And I don't think that person meant it deliberately. It could have just been an honest mistake, but for
But do your homework, right?
yeah, but it tripped me up a
Yeah.
little bit. And so and if they had done their homework, it wouldn't have happened. But
Yeah.
it's fine now. I mean, and I wasn't upset with them. I was just like,
It's like,
oh,
oh,
okay.
right. Like, oh, okay, hold on. Rewind.
Now I know I am confused.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, and
Exactly.
I think to your earlier point, before we got onto the recording, we were talking about partnerships.
Mhm.
And I think that's a really big, important thing. But also, going into our history, like I said, meeting you in the elevator, us just kind of having a chit chat about like, okay, we're here at another industry event. I just want to go home. It's an evening where it's like, you got to smile and whatever. And so I remember just really, I don't know, we just kind of shared the same sentiment about we have to be here. We both have to be working, whatever. But from there,
There's a lot of posturing that goes on
yeah,
at those events, and it can get very silly. I mean, it's wonderful for people watching, but it can get really silly for but when you're trying to do your job and then there's somebody in front of you who's like busy fawning over the person, and you're sitting there waiting 20 minutes going like,
yeah, I
can
just
you
need to ask
wrap
him a
up the
question.
fawning so I can get
Yeah.
my question?
Totally. Yeah. And you were so down to earth and so like real about things. So when I think about media, I think about being the bridge, right?
Mhm.
And so you've probably experienced this yourself where, or maybe you haven't, but where some PR people are like, well, no, I'm supposed to be the wall. I'm the wall between you and the client, and I'm going to set you up, and you guys can talk, but then you can't be connected. And have you ever experienced anything like
Oh,
that?
yeah, yeah. Where they'll say, well, sometimes it's like just go through me, and sometimes it's because they're trying to streamline or they can get an answer faster. And then sometimes they're a gatekeeper, and it's a little different. I ran into more of that in the entertainment sector, and sometimes at the end of an interview, I would ask for the person's email so that in case I had extra questions, and if it was a really good interview, and the person felt comfortable with me, they'd give it to me, and then I watched the publicist pretty much have a coronary at the end of the interview.
But it's Brad Pitt. You're not supposed to have
And I'd be
email
like,
address.
please
Yeah.
leave on the questions. It's
Right.
fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, a lot of times I would do more unusual takes, or I'd find some weird nugget um, in a story. And that's just my own sensibility. And sometimes I'd have to say to the publicist, this is a really interesting story. And I said, it needs something more. I'm like, work
Yeah.
with me on this.
Right.
Let's massage this a little.
Mhm.
Um, and and actually, there have been times when I've said, like, this happened recently. I pitched a story to it was to Fast Company, and because they had approached me to pitch for Fast Company, and my editor said it's a little too wonky for us, meaning it was very technical. It was a little too inside baseball. Um, and she's like, our readers wouldn't be interested in it. And I said, that's fine. And I thought this would be a great story for Air and Space. And so I pitched it to them. And then almost by return email, they were like, yeah, this is a really interesting story. So I got back to the publicist and I said, FC said no, but would you be interested in Air and Space? And so that's supposed to run, I think, sometime this summer. I'm
Well, that's
still,
awesome.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And
but
it's,
that's what I'm saying. It's sometimes there's a story where I'm approached and it doesn't work for one magazine, but
Yeah.
it can work for another magazine.
Yeah.
And
And
that's
I
why
think,
and that's like, and also that's I guess a tip to the publicists, just be flexible, especially if someone writes for a variety of publications.
yeah. And that brings me to my next question, right?
Mhm.
So people need to understand that there are contributors and then there are people who, okay, you write for Fast Company alone, right? You
Right, like
have a
if it's
different
staff or
process, right?
contributors.
You work for a variety of places, mostly Fast Company.
Mhm.
So going backwards, especially for more of the junior publicists who might be listening, a day in your life might look like, okay, flooded inbox. I have to, I have X amount of stories that I need to write for Fast Company, right? Or that they expect that I'm going to be doing. And so in my mind, I am thinking of finding these things, but here's my process. I get an idea, I put the pitch together, I might call you about it, I have to pitch it up to an editor. So I mean, walk us through what something like that might look like so that they understand what it is to be in your shoes.
Okay, so that changes all the time. So it used to be where uh, you know the, it used to be where I was covering a beat and I pretty much had carte blanche to write whatever I wanted to. And then that morphed over time to as there was an editorial changeover and different needs. They revamped the focus of the magazine, so that changed to where I'm now pitching stories. But sometimes my editor will come to me and say, "Hey, we'd like you to do a story on X." So it kind of works both ways. Um, I'm doing a lot of long form stories these days. So I don't wake up in the morning and need to churn out 6 pieces. Um, there are some people at Fast Company who are usually people on staff who are doing that high volume type of news reporting. And I might spend, a month on a piece or longer. And so I might get kind of stuck in on some of the stories. I'll get very technical on some of the stories. And so I'm, I don't need to check my inbox every day for stories. I get hundreds of emails a day and I try to go through as many as possible, but I have a minute for each or a few seconds for each one. It's like, look, and
Looking for the gold nuggets, like, ooh. I mean,
yeah,
what are some of
sometimes
the things you're looking for in a subject line?
yeah, usually you're just looking at subject lines, and then if it piques your interest, then you start looking into the first few sentences, but you don't really have a whole lot of time to spend on each one just because there are so many. By the way, that's how it is for me if I'm pitching an editor. I'm very aware of their time is valuable, they're getting inundated. I have to cut to the chase really quickly. Um, oh, here's the thing that when people are pitching me, they don't need to do when people say, "Hi, how are you? I know that you're busy," but that kind of thing where they're trying to sort of be friendly. And you don't really need to do that, at least with me, because I know that you're just reaching out to me for a story and it's okay. You can just cut right to the chase.
Yeah,
So,
no, I love that. And if someone were to say, and this is something that, tell me if I'm wrong too, because I want to coach my junior staff on a lot of best practices. But what I usually try to do is, if you're going to pitch someone, make sure you have read or listened, right? If they're a podcast, make sure that you listen to a couple of episodes to get a feel for it. If you are going to be pitching a journalist, make sure you've read at least 3. I always say at least 3 pieces so that you in your mind feel confident you're reaching the right person. But I always say compliment them on something. It doesn't have to be, and please don't make it the last story they just wrote, because then it doesn't look like you read anything, but compliment them on what it is they're covering and lead into, okay, that said, I want to introduce you to here are a couple bullets. Do you want to hear more? So that they know that you, or so that you know that they are actually paying attention, because that's a big thing for me. I want my team, if someone sees name at NRPR Group, to know that it is required of the CEO that if you're going to pitch a journalist, you do your homework, right? What do you think about that? And obviously any tips that you can give if that's an approach?
Um, I I think that certainly looking through, a lot of times there'll be you click on a person's name, there'll be a list, an archive of their stories, and you can look down the titles and see, kind of get a feel for the type of stuff that they're covering, and then if one piques your interest, that is similar to the type of story that, or the same subject of the type of story that you're pitching, maybe read that one. And because I know that if someone says there was a story that you wrote about X that really resonated, or that might make me, that'll make me stop and pay a little more attention, because I'll realize that they've taken the time to pay attention to what I write. And it's not an ego boost. It just means that they've put some thought into it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And because again, I try to do that with when I'm pitching stories to a section. I'll try to read and see what they've done in the past, and it'll give me an idea of what they're looking for. Or if there's somebody who's, let's say like for me, if there's an assigning editor who's done a piece that has particularly resonated with me, I might say, I really responded to this piece that you wrote, but it should be genuine. You don't have to.
Don't overly do it, but yeah, I
Yeah,
like that
yeah.
word, genuine.
It's
Yes.
my whole approach to this, because it, journalism for me is kind of been a calling and an adventure, and I get to be in places that are very rarefied, and a lot of people don't get a chance to experience those, either on a movie set or being in the clean room at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, up close and personal with the Mars rover. And it's, you're really privileged. And for me, it's about the excitement of discovering this new subject, and um, meeting the other people covering it, and meeting the scientists, or meeting the actors, or meeting the people putting together this project. And it should be foremost fun and exciting. And if it's not, then get a job that pays a lot of money. You're not,
Right.
honestly, you're not getting paid enough money to be miserable. The reason I'm still doing this 8,000 years later is because I never got tired of it. I really love telling stories. And
I
so
love
if
that.
you, yeah, and so I try to bring that. It's like, that's why when we met in the elevator, it's like I was sort of trying to bring that sense of fun to this function, even though I was there for work. I'm still meeting new people. I'm still having fun conversations. I'm still learning something new. And the publicist should try to bring that excitement and sense of fun too, because I've made some tremendous friendships with publicists, and I've worked on projects with them, and it's and a lot of publicists were former journalists themselves, and so it's kind of it can be a team effort. If a publicist is difficult and doesn't want you to write what you're writing, because there have been times when I've not been their favorite person, and and I've had publicists get really nasty. And then sometimes, oh yeah, and then I've had to say,
Never
listen,
email me again.
no, I just say, listen, I understand the position that you're coming from, but the story is going to be told, and I would prefer if I, either with or without your cooperation, I'd prefer if I could enlist your help in telling this story. I've had people attack me personally or attack my character, and I'll say, I understand that you don't want this story told, but calling me names isn't really going to work, or, enough already. I've had to turn into, I call it my mom voice.
Yeah.
Okay, that's enough. We're going to stop this.
Right.
And yeah, so, you run into scrapes like that, and that's part of the job. But usually if someone gets particular, and I haven't had that in a while, but when I have had that, I try to say, come on.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure, dealing with sensitive subjects sometimes, or I would imagine that if you uncover something before the company is ready to talk about it or whatever, it
Oh
might be
yeah,
like, well, that wasn't our plan, and believe
yeah.
me, being on the other side of that, it had happened where a, a client had raised some money, and of course when you raise money, sometimes that just becomes public information. When the check is signed, that goes up.
Mhm.
And then there was a journalist, and thank goodness we had a relationship. She had inquired about it, and I was like, and then they were like, Nicole is gonna run, and I'm like, calm down, hold on. So I literally emailed her, and yeah, and it became a conversation. I was like, actually, here's the deal, we'll have you break it. I just need 3 more days, because we actually don't even have the press release done. They're almost done with it. If you can wait 3 days, let's
Mhm.
break it together. And she was like, as long as no one else goes, she's like, because if someone else goes, I'm, running the story. I said, no,
Right.
no worries. You're the only one who's inquired to us, and this relationship matters. And after that, I started learning too that, like, if a journalist comes proactively, we've got to figure out a better answer than no comment, right? Because that's not going to help you, and you're going to be like, well, then I'm running the story.
Well,
Right?
the thing is that, as a journalist, you want to give the other side a chance to say something. And if they don't respond, that's okay. That's their choice. And if they say no comment, that's okay. That's their choice. Um, if they start being nasty, it's not really the best approach. But
Yeah,
I
yeah.
also know not to take it personally if someone is really angry about a story running.
Hmm.
And again, it's a little, some of the a lot of the technical stories that I've done, I haven't run into that too much, because it's hard science and I'm trying to articulate how something works. It's more, I did run into that a lot when I was covering entertainment, you know, and then and then I'd get a
I
lot of
can imagine.
hysteria.
Right. Right. You're not supposed to know that that's what he was doing. It's like
Yeah,
all this
or we
crazy
get,
reputation management. Or
yeah, or that's wrong. And I'd say, okay, what's the right
right.
bit of information? Because I have this from someone who's working on your show.
Hmm.
And they'd be, oh, well, we can't tell you. And I'm like, okay, well, in
Yeah.
light of that, yeah.
I'm going to
So,
go ahead and move forward because I do have a source, and I'm going to use, yeah. Yeah. No, I'm with you on that. And that
yeah.
leads me, I mean, one other question that I have, Susan, and I think, this whole fake news media, a big thing for me that just bugs me is that I have so many friends in the media, people that I know work with such integrity, that work really hard to uncover real facts and news, knowing that you have to go through fact checking and things. And then I have friends who are like, oh, I'll never read this because that's fake news. And I'm like, do you know that the process that they have to go through is literally vetting a story, vetting sources, vetting facts? Like, this is not fake news. So, what's your stance on that? I'm sure, do people come to you and they say, well, no, this company's fake news? Obviously not. But what are your opinions on that?
So there are certain publications that work very, very hard to present factually accurate. Certainly there are, there's news outlets that will slant right or left or pro or con, or, or in you with, you might see, this more in London, where you have multiple numbers of tabloids in a single city, and one will side with one subject and one will be against that subject. And then they might flip it. And so they're kind of almost, it's like this convection current of spin. And they're sort of like, they become the spin meisters, pro and con, and until they whip up a frenzy. So that's what I mean. That, but then you have publications that will, and those are more fringe elements that you might see that will qualify as fake news. But usually, I guess, as someone, a trained journalist or a trained publicist, you'll be able to tell the difference. Like I never saw a lot of that on my Facebook feed because I wasn't clicking on it. I didn't pay attention to it. I wasn't.
Yep.
But so so the algorithm wasn't doing that to me.
Right.
But to people, but not everybody has the trained understanding of what's real and what isn't. So, but I can tell you that I try very, very hard to make something factual and to back it up. And having said that, journalists can sometimes make mistakes. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Fair.
I mean,
That's fair.
It's like a doctor,
Yeah.
who is doing
You're
their
gonna
best to try to save a
save a
a
life.
patient. Yeah, it's trying to do their best. And sometimes they make mistakes. Doesn't mean all doctors are bad. It doesn't mean they're bad all the time. It means that sometimes people will make a mistake, and it happens. But I wouldn't. I myself try to be neutral, or if I'm coming at something with a point of view, I'll try to present the opposite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I love that. And thank you so much for sharing. Yeah. Same in
Yeah.
terms of what I saw, but I did see so many friends, who would share certain things. And I just had to give up in terms of trying to help them. And like, you do know
Oh,
that that's not a real outlet, right? And I had to pick and choose my battles. I just had to, keep my mouth shut. I was like, I can't do this anymore, because then otherwise I'd be trying to teach everyone. And there was a man who recently was recording, I believe it was something that happened with the unfortunate recent shooting, and was like, I'm a journalist, because he had whatever. And then the person was asking, well, where are your credentials? Well, credentials? Like you need those? And he goes, oh, like there's a certain journalism school, like I have to go to school to be a journalist? And I just like laughed. I was like, yes,
well,
actually, yes, that oftentimes that happens,
so yes,
Yes.
journalism is a lot. There's some professions where you actually do need to go to school to, you need to go to medical school if you want to become a doctor. Um, you actually, I was going to say law school, but you actually need to pass the bar if you want to be a lawyer. You don't actually have to go. But it's helpful if you go to law school. With the journalism, you don't need to go to journalism school, but it helps to have had. I started writing for my college newspaper, and then I started doing semi-professional stuff in college, um, and then I became professional. But I was still learning in my first job out of college, and I'm actually still learning. I'm still learning.
Yeah. Yeah.
A great editor I learned from, I've had some terrific editors. I have a wonderful one at Fast Company who I learn from all the time. And so, but there are certain things that you learn with journalism, like how to interview people and check your sources and getting a sense of when something sounds fishy. And so just as, yes, someone can go and get a video that captures something and then it goes viral. And in that sense, they can be a citizen journalist, just as
Yes.
someone could be a citizen scientist or an amateur astronomer who discovers a new star. And that's happened.
Yeah.
So it doesn't, you know what? Here's an artist friend gave me a really good way, a barometer for this. You know, uh, anyone could like take that great photo or do that really good drawing, or you might be able to do a one-off thing. It's the professional is the one person who consistently delivers a superior product regardless of how they're feeling or what obstacles they're running into or the deadline pressure. And that's the
I
I think
love
that's
that.
the mark of a professional.
Yeah. I think
And
it's the same with PR a little bit too.
oh
You,
yeah, and you can tell. um I had a wonderful, there was a wonderful publicist I worked with who I showed up and all set to do one kind of story. And there was some glitch that had happened with the company. She was on vacation and she came back, and it wasn't something like, I showed up and it wasn't something that they were prepared to talk about, or some news thing changed with the company. And she said, listen, I know that you signed off on doing, your editor signed off on doing X. We can't do X. But what I was suggesting is, what about Y? It would still work. It would still be this. So I said, okay, let's, like, it wasn't her spin. It was like a viable slant. And so I said, okay. And so I pivoted, but she had to also pivot. But she pivoted in a very professional way. It also happened that she had been a former journalist too. So, but she, that's a really good example of grace under pressure. Anyone could have, a junior publicist could have said, or a novice publicist could have said, here, would you like some coffee? This is so and so. Have it, sit down, and
right.
it's a seasoned one who was able to say, no, we can't do this story anymore because things change. How about a new slant? And that's
Yeah.
kind of the equivalent in a publicist sense.
I love that. I love that you said that. And again, for everyone who's listening, it's important to pivot when you need to, do your homework, know what the journalist needs, understand what your client is trying to accomplish, and be honest, be upfront. If they are no longer launching something, let the person know, right? And say, this is what we've got to work with, this is what we can try, and if that doesn't work for you, like, be completely respectful of that, right? And I love that they took that approach and that they understood from a journalist perspective, here's what might work for you, and they thought it through without either giving up or just handing it over and letting the client drop the bomb and like, oh wait, this isn't what we're talking about, and then it just becomes uncomfortable, right? Yeah.
Right. Actually, you know what? You're going to laugh. Hands down, the best communications department I've ever encountered has been Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which is a division of
Really?
NASA. They are brilliant across social media,
Love it.
across animated explanatory videos, across finding news hooks. I mean, they'll come up with 5 different news hooks for the same type of story. Um, and very, very well informed press releases.
Ooh, I'm gonna
very
have to check that
responsive
out. I
team.
love it.
Yeah, yeah, and they are they're just a delight to work with, and
Aw.
yeah, you should get on their press list,
Yeah.
see how they
See how they
approach,
do it.
and their social media campaigns are amazing, and yeah, but you think
Okay.
really
Like,
NASA?
yeah,
Oh,
Jet Propulsion Laboratories,
technically
huh?
Jet
NASA.
Propulsion Laboratory.
That
Yeah.
is amazing. Okay, well, I'm going to take you up on that. I'm definitely going to look at it because it's, trying to implement as many best practices as possible. I've been doing this 21 years. I'm still learning. I love the fact that I'm still learning and evolving and hoping to do some good by teaching, teaching the ways. But
And
yeah, it's
by the way, I learned from publicists because you know how everybody's a brand now. And so I'm so used to being the conduit to a story. I look at journalism as kind of an interpretive art, or an interpretive discipline. Um, you are presenting a scenario as opposed to coming up with something from scratch, which
right.
people might argue some journal. But for the most part, um, and so I've actually talked to my publicist friends about branding, um, and about presentation, and
I
you
love
know,
that.
yeah. So it's and the fact, like, if you're still learning in your job 20 years or 30 years later,
Yeah.
you're really lucky. You're really
Mm,
lucky, because a lot of times people get to that. Sometimes they get to the 10-year mark, but if they, a lot of times they'll get to a certain point and they'll be, "Ugh, I'm just so done with this. I'm tired. I've been there, done that. There's
right.
nothing new to learn." And I feel badly for those people.
Yeah, same. I
So,
mean,
yeah.
it's one of those things where we all are going to be working for a really long time, right? And as our lifespans increase, our work life spans often, so I think about it and I just think, as technology evolves, as companies evolve, as communications platforms evolve, there's always something new to learn. Learning Clubhouse now, learning, how to make it's so much different from when I started that companies weren't thinking of themselves as brands. They weren't thinking about the owned piece of their own
Yeah.
story. And now that's such a big piece of it. And so it's made my job a lot more fun because then I feel like, okay, we really need to own our voice, own our place, figure out what is important to us, what's not. So we know that we're not trying to be a jack of all trades, right? And
And
yeah,
publicity has changed, just the way journalism has changed over the years.
yeah,
Publicity has changed. How you approach advertising has changed. How you approach branding versus, um, you know, what people did even 10 years ago is different than how people approach things now.
yeah,
Like what might have been sort of business as usual 10 years ago now doesn't ring true anymore, and people want a more authentic experience.
right.
And
And
okay.
I was going to say, and media
Mhm.
outlets, platforms, they're evolving too, right? And so what I know we have a couple more minutes. I want to pick your brain on, the evolution of, say, Fast Company and some of the other places that you've written for.
Mhm.
What are they really looking at in terms of the future, right? And what do they need? What kind of sources so that people who are listening can help you, can help them, can help, what is it that we should be bringing and not be bringing, right? In some ways it's like, don't bother us with this is not the place, but this is where we're trying to be. Very curious to hear how PR people can help by knowing what it is you guys need.
Well, the things, see, there might be an evolution at a publication um, based on if they get a new influx of editors, if they get a top editor, if they do a brand change, if they rebrand their magazine or tweak their brand, it'll change. Corona, with the pandemic, everything was changing because I had a bunch of articles I was working on, or I was like set up to do, all of a sudden the pandemic hit, those weren't important anymore. Suddenly everybody was pivoting to cover
Masks.
well, that's how I got, okay, so that's how I got into writing about masks.
Yeah.
And so what happened was my editor said, I said, look, I know science, I know medicine, like, let me do something. You're wasting me. If you just, like, I can do this. And she said, well, we have someone who's covering the medical aspects, but we desperately need stories about masks. And I'm like, I'm on it. And because I had taken all these science courses in college, I'd taken physics and chemistry and biochemistry. So I did a story about masks, but it involved a knowledge of chemistry and it was material science, basically.
Yeah.
And which is, and I'm literally going like, oh, how many valence electrons does copper have again? Like, it was that deep. And I ended up doing the story on masks thinking, no one's going to read this. But my editor
I read it. Yeah.
the world, I did a podcast, it went viral.
Yep.
Who knew? But, and friends were asking me, what do you think? And what should I do about this mask? And then I did another story about antiviral and antimicrobial fabrics and the difference between fabrics claiming to be antimicrobial and antiviral and ones that actually can kill this particular coronavirus. So, and then that kind of calmed down, and then I went back to writing about space. I did a big piece on Tesla um, in the summer, and it was the first time I'd ever written about Tesla, and that was a lot of battery science and autonomous vehicle science, and there was a lot of that to ramp up on. So again, at the beginning of the year, I had no idea that I'd be writing about any of this stuff, and so I was having to pivot, and it was all based on and now a lot of publications have metrics that they can see how people are responding to their articles. So they'll be like, oh, people seem to respond really well when we write about X.
Right.
And that was changing every 3 months this past
The
year.
algorithms, the almighty.
Yeah. So
Yes.
for me to say, okay, I'm looking for this now.
Yeah.
In 3 months, it could change.
Yep.
I think that looking at, I think going back to what we were saying before is looking at the publication, looking at the person covering the area that you want to cover, and doing that, and is really your best approach. And again, that's what I do. But there's a publication that I want to target, and I see I see who's writing these stories. I see if any of those bylines are assigning. If not, then I see what the section is demanding. And even if I miss and they don't want it, at least they'll see that I've made an effort to understand their publication. By the way, I spent some time in London in '98, and I ended up writing for a number of British publications and learned a lot about publications change according to the culture. There's a different way that, like,
especially in London. That's so fascinating. I feel like we can have a separate conversation about that. I'm very intrigued. That sounds interesting.
Different publication, different countries have different approaches to different cultures have different approaches to journalism, and the way and if I do a story for a British publication, I might do a slightly different tone than I always say that after that I learned how to write in British, and I can
Love
write
it.
American.
Got it. Got it. It's like English, but different English.
And then you never know with this isn't really a publicist thing, um, but because a publicist will have clients, but I can tell you just from me, when I travel, when I used to travel, when we were allowed to travel, hopefully again, I'll go somewhere and I'll see like I see stories everywhere. I'll just see something and I'll be like, oh, that's a really great story. And so I've found stories all over the world just by kind of paying attention or
Paying
seeing
attention.
what's different. And so yeah, so that's where I'm, I'm constantly getting inspired by what's going on around me and what strikes me as different or unusual, or I'll see how people are doing something in one part of the world and I'll equate it to what's going on over here and I'll say, oh, I'm seeing parallels here.
Ooh, I
Yeah.
like that. Okay,
Yeah.
so like I'm taking that in too. I'm like,
I'm
okay,
not
well,
sure how that
how,
applies to what a junior publicist can take away from that. I'm
right?
just
Well,
telling you how
it's
my mind works. Yeah.
I feel like, junior, senior, anyone who cares to do work with a media or a member of the media responsibly. It's really, again, just going into the fact that they are human, that they are trying to do a job, that and understanding the way you work. I mean, the thing of it is, it's fascinating. I think you said you've been to every continent. I think
I've
that's
been to
something I
every
learned.
I've been sick on every continent
Oh
as
my
well.
goodness. And that too. So it's, knowing that and knowing that you have such a world view on things. So that again, if I want to work with you on something or someone wants to work with you on something, they should know that this is the person that they are approaching, right? And just showing that human tie
You
to
don't have
some,
to know like every little detail about a reporter's life. I mean,
right.
sometimes it's nice to know because you can have that little personal touch. But
Mm-hmm.
I guess what um, I do know that publicists and press work differently in different countries.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're dealing across cultures, then, and certainly there are a lot of cultures within the US,
Yes.
then you have to sort of be sensitive to how people uh,
Work.
work with that. Um, America is I found American culture is very direct.
Mm-hmm.
Um, at least East Coast culture or West
Mm-hmm.
Coast culture is a
Mm-hmm.
little more direct. Um, when I was living and now I've never lived in the South, but I see there's a little slightly different way of the way people interact with each other in the South,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe that crosses over to the press or publicists as well. I do know
Right.
that when I was spending a lot of time in London, I would call people and say, "Hi, this is Sue Karlin. I'm doing a story for the blah, 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 and I need
Mm-hmm.
to talk to you about X." And there would be this silence at the other end of the phone. And I started listening to how people talk to each other in Britain, and I realized that I was being too American, too direct. So
Ah.
I'd get on the phone and I'd say, "I'm so sorry to trouble you. I just have a few questions. Would you mind spending a little time with me on the, would it be okay?" "Oh, absolutely." Then it
Oh,
was okay.
wow.
But then I'd call back to America to do stories and they'd say, "Hurry up. What do you want?"
Yeah. Like I have 5 minutes. Do you have a question? I can give you an
Yeah,
answer. Wow, that's so
yeah,
interesting.
yeah. So you're dealing with, like, if you're dealing
Cross
across
culture.
cultures, now there's been a huge rise in the Spanish speaking press.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that, now my Spanish is awful. It's like I can make my way around a city. I have no business doing interviews with it.
Right.
But it's a different, I
Culture.
don't know if the Spanish speaking press has a different way of interacting between publicists and
That's
And
interesting. That would actually make a good
yeah,
interview too. I'm very curious about that. Didn't even think
yeah,
about
there's
that
a
too. Even
different,
within America, different cross culture journalism. Yeah.
yeah, and that's just stuff that I've picked up from traveling so
Mm,
much. It's just that American culture is not the only way of doing things. And when
sure.
you go, I was flown over to Singapore to moderate at a technology conference and meeting people from China and
Mm,
India and all over. And America was sort of an afterthought. I mean, there's a
wow.
whole other world going on there, and that America is a little bit a part of, but not I mean, in that part of the world, China is the big,
Yeah.
you know, and so
Interesting.
yeah, and so, uh, you know, just
Little
as you,
seeds. Just keep that. Yeah. Keep that in
respecting
mind.
where you are, just sort of
Yeah.
having a sense of where you are and that you're not all that and that you're here
Right.
to learn
Yeah.
and yeah, it just I mean I try to bring a little bit of humility
Yeah.
to the job, uh, but at the same time confidence in this is the story I'd like to write, or this is what I think is going on, but
Right.
if I'm wrong, I'm happy to have my mind changed and
Yeah.
just be, that kind of flexibility.
No,
Now,
I love it. Yeah. No,
having said
this,
that,
oh,
having
yeah.
said that, you know that I'm checking out the impulse,
Yeah.
at the checkout line, I'm reading all that stuff.
Yeah. I love it. Oh my gosh. Well, this has been great. I mean, I feel like I can talk to you forever, and please, like I'll probably reach out to you again to have you back on the show. I feel like there's so much that we can uncover. This has just been a blast, but I want to also
I've
give
really
you an
enjoyed it.
opportunity. Is
Yeah.
there anything else that you want people to know, where people can follow you? Anything else that you need so that we can be a resource for you? Please let us know.
So, gosh, I'm trying to think of, I would say that I do my very best to look at every pitch. And if you Google Fast Company, comma, Susan Karlin, you'll see my archive story at Fast Company. At some point, before I check into a home, I'm going to actually organize a really souped up website and like a
Yeah.
adult person and get all that branding. So I've honestly I've been so busy
Oh
writing
my goodness.
chance. And then if people tweet at me, Twitter me, whatever the term is, they can find me. I'm at Sue Carlin on Twitter, and yeah, I mean, I really do my best to respond, and unless someone's being a nudnik, and then I'll just. Although I'll tell
Yeah.
you when I'll leave this, and I'll leave this with this story. This is an interesting story. I was once trolled on Twitter. I wrote a story, and people were really angry at me about the
Oh,
story. They felt that the person I wrote about was a fake, and I ended up like I was going to ignore everyone, and I went, "There's something here. There's something
right.
here." So I went down to the first person, and I said, and I who started the Twitter troll, and I
Yeah.
said, "Can we talk?" And I said, "What's going on? Like, if I did something wrong, I want to make it right. Like, what
Yeah.
happened?" And he said, "This is a, you know, this is the information." And I said, "Would you go on the record?" And and he said, "Absolutely." And so I started doing a new story, um, and basically the story that the original publicist had presented wasn't quite the whole truth. The person had not been vetted and
Ooh.
properly, and so the the trolls
The trolls came in to help.
came me and said, "You didn't do your homework," and I was like, "Great, let's do it."
Let's do it. Let's
And
do
I
it
said,
together.
"What? Yeah, this was, and not only they duped a lot of journalists. It wasn't just me.
Wow.
And yeah, so the company didn't do its homework. And so I ended up redoing the story, and
Interesting.
but with the help of I contacted all of the people who were, yeah, all the trolls, and I said, thanks for alerting me, I'm on it. And then I had them helping me.
Wow.
And they found sources for me. And then when I wrote it and I tweeted it back and I said, okay, guys, here it is. And so I ended up actually enlisting their help. And that's what I'm saying. It's like, you never know.
You never know.
You never know where
That's so
information
interesting.
where is going to come from, or information or help, or, yeah. So I try to be open.
Yeah.
And I try to be kind, and I
Mhm.
try to be nice and supportive. I don't want to add to the negativity.
Yeah. I love that about you. And Susan, I am just, first of all, I am thankful that you have given me so much time. This has been fascinating. And like I said, I love your work. I love reading your articles, and I've always been just very cognizant about what should go your way and not. Like, so me personally, like I said, I know we worked on that liquid art Pepsi installation, and that was great. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
we can work together. But you're just, thank you for just being you and for giving us this time. And it's been,
and good luck with this podcast, this Zoomcast. It's a great idea.
Thank you.
And I'll be watching, because there might be things that I'll learn from other journalists of how they do things.
Definitely. Thank you. So yes. So Susan, thank you for a great discussion. Thank you, audience, for listening. Of course, you have been listening to Perfect Pitch. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play. I'm going to go through the whole gamut. And if you're watching on YouTube, please click the button below to subscribe there. And you can find me or NRPR at www.nrprgroup.com. Until next time, Susan, hopefully you'll come back and join us. Everyone.
Oh, absolutely. This is fun. Plus, I get to procrastinate my story.
Yay! Well, happy to help on that, right?
What?
I said happy to help be a fun distraction for you.
That's right. I'm happy to help you procrastinate as well. And by the way, that is the sign of a true writer.
Right. Totally. I'm like, as my inbox floods, I'm just like, oh, Susan, let's keep chatting. Yes.
That's
so
right.
Thank you so much for everything. And all right, everyone, take care. Bye-bye.